Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Harebrained Games. Today we're going to do a review of a game called Combat Commander Europe. Now, this game is old enough to have grandkids if you count gaming years as a multiplier of normal years. It came out in 2006. It is a game for exactly 2 players, although you can play both sides solo. It takes anywhere from an hour to 3 hours to complete a scenario. It's done by the late Chad Jensen, one of the prolific GMT warriors whose games I have yet to be disappointed by. And in it, you are playing a tactical level squad, squad level down in the trenches, moving across fields and streams and rivers and terrain kind of war game experience. It is Germans against Russians against Americans in a variety of different scenarios. Where it sets itself apart is in its not entirely predictable nature of how the battle takes place. So with that, let's take a look at what's in the box.
Okay, let's take a look at what's inside Combat Commander Europe. First off, you get a playbook with various scenarios, not very thick, but quite meaningful. And you get a rulebook, again, not incredibly thick given the game's depth. Nice index, thank you, Chad. That's what you get. You get maps, and each map is paper, and so I bought glass specifically for games of this type with terrain features, etc. Each of the forces, Russians, Germans, and Americans, get their own fate deck. What is the fate deck? The fate deck has different orders. You can see at the top different actions and events, as well as some extra information. This bottom row handles any of the random events that occur and also acts as dice rolls. So you're not going to use dice in this game to resolve anything. You're simply going to use the flip of a card to determine what the actual dice roll is. 72 cards, which I think means that you'll get 2 copies of any combination. So 2, 1 dice, 1 dice, 2 dice, 2 dice, etc., etc. So I believe that's there. You're going to get these handy player aids, which explain a lot of the details in concise formats. You're going to get this track display. Now, the track display is interesting because it stores a ton of information that we're going to go into as we play the game and set up the scenario. In it, you have tons of tracks to track various things, probably why they call them tracks. And then, of course, you'll get some additional information here that talks about some of the terrain features or things placed on the terrain. Also, you'll have a nice terrain chart that breaks down for you all of the various benefits, bonuses, minuses, hindrances of the terrain. You're going to get a boatload of pieces in my not so well arranged counter trays. German side, Russian side, American side, and of course a lot of things for smoke, things for foxholes, objectives. Basically, you get a lot. The units themselves are pretty basic functionality. We have your firepower, your range, and your movement on the bottom. This is a leader, so he has a command radius in the middle, and then morale is the top. And the morale is kind of like your sort of health threshold per se. You're also going to get these handy charts that kind of talk about 3 of the different sides. Very handy and beneficial, especially if you're doing your own scenarios. And the big thing is this map is just one first of many of these maps, and so you're going to get a ton of maps. This is another map, so you have this. You flip it over and you have that side. And notice how the terrain complexity changes with the different maps. This has, for example, hills, 1, 2, 3 levels of hills, lots of terrain features, lots of places to cover and hide, and you have a full stack of maps. They're paper maps, and so they were able to basically bust a ton of different map styles in to get us going. And that's what's in the box of Combat Commander Europe. Now we're going to get into an example of gameplay. Before I begin, I'm going to lay out sort of the prequel of what this battle is going to be. I will tell you now, in no uncertain terms, that this playthrough is not going to even come close to demonstrating the depth and complexity of Combat Commander. It's not going to really be useful in a deep tutorial way, and honestly, it's going to give you a the lightest overview I think that is possible in what hopefully still provides you with an idea of how you will play the game, so that if you decide this is of interest to you, you can pursue it further with some of the other excellent tutorial videos that have come out in the many, many years since Combat Commander Europe first came to our shores. So, let's begin. We have a scenario here which I've mocked up. This is like, yeah, I placed these guys in such a fashion, don't even worry about it. This is, in the real scenario for this, the Russians would start at certain corners, the Germans would start in certain ways. The idea being you control certain areas of the game, and that's how you win or lose. In this particular scenario, every scenario has a little bit of a different idea of what constitutes victory conditions, or places that are meaningful to earn victory points, taking out units worth victory points, etc., etc. Now, before we go that, we're going to go to the combat track, because that's going to help explain a few things here. This kind of is your pulse, your heart of the game. The victory track is like Twilight Struggle, goes back and forth. You earn points, yay. If your opponent earns points, it goes back and forth. The idea being, you want the most victory points at the end of the game. Casualty track is interesting because each side has a certain amount of casualties where if you take that many casualties, you instantly lose. Insta-lose. The time track is another aspect that's pretty interesting. As you start, certain events in the game, such as exhausting your deck, or certain event cards or events on cards that show up, will trigger a time event, and that moves time forward. You move forward, certain things happen, blah blah blah. Once you get here, you begin rolling a dice, and if the dice amount is less than the sudden death amount, then the game is concluded and you determine who wins. Finally, oh, don't worry about attack total. That's just a nice helper for when you're in the middle of battle. There's the year counter, which is mostly flavorful. The order of battle is interesting because it determines how the quality of the troops you have, but also the amount of orders that you can play each of your turns. In this particular scenario, the Russians can play up to 3 cards. The Germans can play up to 2. And finally, the objective chits. And this is important. During the start of the match, and again, every scenario is a little different, but in this one, you have a common objective, which means that if you take over, whoever controls this particular location is currently going to earn that amount of victory points. 3. Also, each side has a secret objective. Sometimes they don't get to keep them secret, and that is basically a secret objective that they're going for. In this case, the Germans would be going for number 5. So if the Germans control this, they're going to get extra points at the game. Now, of course, the Russians do not know this secret objective, and so they're going to have to wonder if the Germans going here, was that because they earned victory points, or it was because they were looking for a particular way that was advantageous to try to take out Russian units. And of course, the Russians have 4, so look at that. They're over there, they control that, they're going to get the victory points. And that's the essence of play. There's really not a ton more about it. There are certain, for orders and actions are kind of the heart of everything. They're the thing that is that you can sort of choose. You have dominion to be able to choose to affect events. So let's go over the cards and what they can do. Orders are the heart and the meat of the deterministic aspect of play. This is what you choose to do. That and any actions that you can choose if they are allowable in any given context. Events, they just happen. Orders are advance, which is sort of a one-shot. I can move 1 space, and that's all, but I don't have to worry about getting fired at from opportunistic enemy forces. Artillery denied and request, those are things that have to do with artillery, which this particular scenario does not have. Command confusion is a waste card, so it's basically a no-op that just kind of gets stuck in your hand, although they might have some interesting actions that go with them. Fire is the I'm going to fire at something. Move, I think we know what that does. Recover, when you take damage, you will you will have to flip your unit over to its lesser side, and recover lets you flip it back up to its non-lesser side. And route is when you want to try and shove units off the map, so that's probably the least likely of opportunistic things. So for example, like I was saying, here we have the rifle squad. If they take damage, they flip over to their opposite side, and at that point certain there's certain effects. You'll notice they're dramatically reduced in their effectiveness and their ability to do anything. You probably want to recover this unit as much as possible. Also, if they have attached guns, those don't become useful, or those are not usable when a unit is broken. They call it broken. And that's that. Now let's talk about the cards and see what we're doing at. One too many. So on your turn, you're going to have different sets of cards based on what role you're going to play, because there's attack, there's defend, and there's, I think, a recon. Recon says that you get 5 cards. Since both sides are in recon, they get 5 cards. And again, this setup doesn't exist in any of the scenarios. I'm doing this just to kind of show examples of gameplay that are indicative of what you would experience in all the other scenarios. Artillery request, worth nothing. Fire might be useful, don't know. Move is definitely useful. Route, not really useful right now in command confusion. So if I had a choice right now, I would, and this is going to sound crazy, I would do a discard. You can either play cards up to the amount of your OB level, which is once again here. So as a Russian, I can play up to 3 cards, or I can do a discard action to discard cards up to the allowable amount. Notice that each country has a different level of discard that they can do. Russia can discard up to 3 cards, and that's what's going to happen. These aren't really that useful for me, although the actions might be if I can play them. But since I'm not a defender, I'm a recon, that doesn't matter. This is possibly useful later, because it can be tacked onto a fire action, but not necessarily right now. And command confusion basically doesn't give me any opportunity, and the smoke grenades, that would be nice, but I'm going to risk it. So he discards and draws, and that's the entire turn. Oh no, another artillery quest. But now we have 2 fire actions and an advance. So that's going to be good for our next turn, but it's time to go see what the Germans are going to do. The Germans have these 5 cards available to them. Again, oh man, this is... So of all these cards, recover basically says if you have a broken unit, which the Germans don't, then you could use that. Move, now that might be interesting. Might want to do that. Command confusion, not useful. Command confusion, again, not useful. Artillery request, we don't have artillery. We're in the same boat. Now this is what's interesting, because the Germans can discard up to 6 cards. They could basically refresh their entire hand. And they're instead going to ditch 4 cards and add 4 more. And this is a little bit more interesting this time of opportunities. Look at that, move and fire. Now we're in a good situation. We had to give up a turn, so we're now kind of giving the Russians we gave them breathing room that we could have used, but we need to be able to have good orders. We only get 2, so we need to make them count, 2 per turn. Now we're back to the Russians. The Russians are going to do an advance, and you can only activate... So this is what's interesting about advancing. Any card you use can affect 1 unit, and 1 unit only. So if I choose advance, I have to choose a unit somewhere that is going to be activated. However, there are leaders, and leaders are where you get the most bang for buck. A leader unit, I'm going to say, here you are. Here you are. Oh, come on, show focus. This is... sorry, guys. Sergeant Kovalev. He's a leader. Now, why does that matter? Because he has a command range of 2. That means that if you activate this leader as your single unit, he can then turn around and activate any other units within range of 2 for the same action. And that's exactly what you want to do. Almost always you're going to want to do that if you can. It also is what makes leaders so very important. So this unit, this unit, this unit, this unit, all of these units are now able to be activated to do an advance. What does that mean? It means they can move 1 space And not only can they move one space, we're going to move everybody. They can, we'll keep them there. They don't have to worry about opportunity fire. And that's huge. So that's it. So they've advanced. Now they've all been activated. So I don't think there's anything else I want to do on my turn. Well, this hasn't been. I choose not to activate him. But there's... yes, we're going to do a fire. We're going to show you what fire looks like. Fire lets you... well, let you fire. So what do we have here? This is, once again, I use the mnemonic form. Fire, range, movement. So it's got good form. So firing means I can fire power of 5. That's how strong my attack is. Range is 3. Movement is 4. Now, if I activate this unit for this fire action, I don't really have a chance. Because 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I don't have anything in range, but I have a machine gun. And it is firepower of 6 and a range of 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now the question is, and so I can actually fire on this unit here, actually on this hex, and that will attack both these units. So let's do that. First thing we have to do is test line of sight. Can we see it? Yes, we can. We go from the middle of this hex to the middle of that hex and go, is there anything blocking? There's nothing that blocks our line of sight completely, although we'll find out shortly that there is something that will impede it. And so we're going to attack our medium machine gun against the units here. So what do we do that? Well, we have a handy dandy sheet that kind of explains to us what we're going to do. Now, the total attack power is 6. There's no leader, so there's no bonus for that. So it's basically 6. 6 is the attack power. Then we don't have elevation to worry about, because if we did, then that might add or remove. Minus hindrance. Now I believe if you look at the chart for hindrance, you're going to see that fence is a hindrance of 1. Because it's smack dab in the middle of my firing. That doesn't stop me from having line of sight the way a building or the woods would, but it does keep me from being able to get full firepower. So instead of 6, it will be 5. Because, yeah. I really hope that's right. I need to get a level and measure that and make sure, because when you do hex to hex, some people get string and they string it together. I think we're fine. If not, let's pretend it's here. We're just, yeah. The hand of God made a choice. Okay, so 5, 6. Minus 1 is 5. Then we're going to take a card, flip it over, and look at it. Whoa, 12. 5 plus 12 is 17. And we'd use this to kind of explain. Note also that we have a time event. Whenever a box shows around, or a red box, something happens. It could be a sniper event that can cause a sniper to cause chaos. It can be an event that means you then look at you draw a card and see what event happens, like Suppress Russian squads, blah blah blah. Or it can be jammed, which would jam your guns, etc. These are things that happen, and what happens is, and why they have that particular moniker there, is that when you determine your attack value, if there's an event, you stop what you're doing, set it aside, take care of the actual event that occurs, and then return to your regular broadcast. And that's an interesting thing that you kind of have to keep in mind as you're doing this, because these interrupts can cause unpredictable events to occur, some of which may affect the current battle directly, some of which may affect the battle elsewhere. So we have 17. So for the defense, we have to exceed 17, or we have to match 17 for our defense. Now how do we do that? Well, we go for each unit and go 7. The leader adds 1 to every stat. So instead of 7, it's 8. Minus 1 for the road, it's back to 7. If it was in one of these buildings, it would add 3 to cover, and that would help. So it's down to 6. And then we draw a card. 6 plus 11, 17. Wow, 17. So, amazing. We did it. We actually survived with this unit, but now we also have to test this one. 6 minus 1 is 5. Now, leaders don't get to inspire themselves. Oh, ouch. So, now this leader is broken. It no longer has a command value, and it's got some seriously low stats. So, the next turn, when the Germans come back up to do something, they're going to want to try and do a recover action if they possibly can. That's an example of combat in its probably its simplest form. And then we played 2 of the 3 cards. I don't want to do anything more, so I would draw back up to 5. This is the nature of the gameplay for combat. Really simple. I could literally spend hours going over all the various contexts and scenarios to talk about the actions and what happens. But I think it's best to leave that to the experts who've already done walk. That's one of the advantages of a game this old. There's a lot of information available and a lot of textual and a lot of visual information to go over each and every nuance of this very, very elaborate game. So what's going to happen is, as we talked about, as you gain and lose units, they go on the casualty track. And then, if the casualties wrap up to 5, you lose. Again, if you take over objectives, well, that 3, well, now you know that you're going to get 3 points for that. There's opportunity fire. For example, if you had a move action and you wanted to move units, they're at range. For example, this is a range of 4, but with a gun it's down to 2, so it can move 1, 2, same thing here, 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, these are bad moves, by the way. Then you would have an opportunity to have order action counter fire, opportunity fire, and that's what makes movement so dangerous. Unless you're advancing slowly, is that you might be having people take pot shots at you left and right. It makes how you move in the terrain and where you station yourself. For example, if we go in here, we now have an extra 3 cover defense. It's going to help us greatly. And so on and so on. And we're not even getting into artillery. Artillery is kind of its own little mini game. And as certain scenarios dictate, you will have artillery become much more of an impact, pardon the pun, than other scenarios. But this is the nature of Combat Commander. I, again, am just giving you an idea of what the gameplay is. I'm not really going through a full tutorial. Someday, if someone was interested, I could sit down and actually do a sort of a playthrough. I don't think I would do justice compared to, I think there's 2 specific reviewers that have done a fantastic job of doing playthroughs in a way that's absolutely authoritative. But I think hopefully this is enough to explain to you what's going on and the flow of the game. As I said, we get into events that occur when you're flipping these cards, because these cards are multi-purpose, and the idea is you are cycling through your deck. Event, for example, like you can see that. So if I drew this to say fire, and I wanted my card to add to my firepower, and it said event, I'd stop, and it would say, hey, make a roll for 1 Russian unit. If greater than its morale, eliminate it. If not, rally it. So a lot of things are going to happen. You're going to walk in here. The rule book does a great job of basically adding real world quotes from real world generals in the past, one of which is, no plan survives coming into contact with the enemy, and no grand scheme is going to survive coming into contact with this game after a while, because certain things are going to happen and you're going to have to adapt and improvise in order to achieve the results of victory, all in an entertaining way. So that's it. That's an example of some of the things that you can do in Combat Commander Europe. Now let's get into my thoughts on what I think of the game.
All right, my final thoughts on Combat Commander Europe. First, as always, the cons, then the pros, then the summary. If you are not a wargamer, there's a lot to take in that might tax your ability to remember minute details as you learn the game and get familiar with the many, many, many facets of input that are involved. As a matter of fact, the game is 14 years old, and I still routinely see in playthroughs, I've never seen a perfect one. There's always a little, oh, yeah, I forgot about that here and there and stuff. That's just something to be aware of. It's just something to be aware of. You will have to do some investment into learning the rules if you're not already a wargamer. If you're coming from advanced squad leader on down, then this will be smooth and flowing. But if you're someone, say, in the Memoir 44 realm, battle lore, etc., and you're kind of coming up to try something new, gird your mental loins with the preparation of a lot of details needing to be understood. There are advantages we'll talk about later about some of the ways that this game helps facilitate that in a very, very smooth manner. I bought this game, as an example. I bought this game back in 2012. I got it to the table. I put it back. I brought it back out to the table. I put it back. Repeat, lather, rinse, repeat. It reminded me of the time when I first started playing a musical instrument back in 4th grade, and I chose the flute. Someone suggested that would be awesome. And when I first started playing, I can tell you I sounded like a hollow tree trunk, praying for death. That was my proficiency. But I spent 4 solid months practicing day in, day in, and day in and day out, just practicing. I was driven to learn and understand this. And after the end of the 4 months, because of my investment, I sounded like a hollow tree trunk begging for death. So I picked up the trumpet, and guess what? A week later, I was playing well, and I ended up being winning a lot of awards for solo trumpet kind of work. So the point is, this game went from being a flute to being a trumpet for me. And once I made that transition, then things started rolling and rolling well. The other thing is, when you're thinking of this, you have a lot to think about. Be aware of that. It's not a con against the game. It's more of a, bridges and out, but drive carefully over it kind of thing. You've got unit modifiers that you have to consider for attack, unit modifiers for defense, the role of command and how it emanates out to other units, elevation modifiers, terrain feature modifiers, order of play, switching it up and the interrupts back and forth, group fire and the different rules for that, opportunity fire and the different rules for that, combat resolution for that, extra targeting phase for ordnance weapons versus not, on and on. You understand what I'm saying. There's a lot to take in. The other thing is, if you like the lack of chaos, if you want determinism, if you want predictability, if you want to set out a plan and see how well you did in executing that plan, this might not be the best game for that. Chaos is the hallmark of this game. There's no dice, but there is a lot to not hang your hat on as far as being able to plan for events as the game unfolds. The thing is, interrupts. This game, if you're someone who's like, I take my turn, I follow these 6 steps, then it's your turn, you follow these 6 steps, not the game. This game has a lot of interrupts. You're going to have little commercial breaks in between your actions, little commercial breaks of chaos in the middle of an otherwise chaotic show. You do a fire, crap, we got a sniper event, figure that out, come back to this and stuff. So you have to have that in mind, as it really does represent the chaotic, like juggling 7 balls in the air kind of experience of tactical warfare. The other thing is, I have always hated paper maps. I hate them. I'm surprised how polarizing of an opinion that could be. I've mentioned that locally at times and been just really taken aback by how people get really upset that I even dare it. Don't you understand? Cost increases, blah, blah, blah. I get all that. My answer to that is, if someone makes a mounted map, I'll buy it instead of what I have in there. Unconditional surrender, cataclysm, enemy coast ahead. All of these are ones that I will gladly pay for a mounted map, just because I know that's just an aesthetic that I personally enjoy. There are games I would not buy because they have paper maps, and then there's ones that are too good to pass up that I will, like I said, I bought a $30 piece of glass, which, as a caveat, don't drop it on your foot. I learned that the hard way. But this, I will say that Combat Commander Europe and actually another game called The Last 100 Yards provide an almost insurmountable, compelling reason not to have a mounted map board. And that is because it affords the ability to, in that small box, have so many maps. Double-sided pieces of paper. the map, just tons of maps. This is not even conceivable with a mounted map board. The most you could probably do would be to provide terrain cubes like Memoir 44 or others, where you have to create and construct the battlefield on the fly, which is doable, but the advantage here is you have a map. Take out the paper, slap it down, put glass on it, you're ready to go. No jostling, no moving, nothing. So in this case, I think paper maps are the essential way to go, to be able to get so much value out of this. And those are the cons. That's a pretty lighthearted cons. Let's get to the pros. The rulebook is near perfection. While I did rely on videos for learning because I'm a visual learner, I found myself using them just to make sure I understood the rules, not because I had to augment the rules to gain knowledge. Everything I need to know is in this rule book. Everything I need to know is organized in a way that makes sense in this rule book. Nomenclature is great. The phrasing is consistent. Terminology is consistent. It uses the same word for the same thing over and over. Yes, no rule book is perfect, but this is so close. And so I have nothing but the greatest respect for taking all of the things that you have to be wrangled in this game and creating a rule book that does it justice and beyond. The maps are exquisite in their detail. Paper aside, the quantity of maps is staggering. The nice blend of terrain with legibility. It's not so overwhelming. You're like trying to read like what's on there that matters. You absolutely know the map is functional and aesthetic in perfect balance. I'm still amazed that every single titular detail of this game is reasonable and sensible when you think it through. There are no arbitrary rules that are out of place for what you expect in warfare. No, we needed to make this rule because it just kind of had to be there to make sure the game didn't fall off the rails from balance perspective, whatever. Nothing like that. If you see a target, you can attack a target. If everybody nearby sees, even better. You have options. If you're in a building, you're going to get cover, but you can be fired on. If you're behind a building by one space, you're safe from being fired on, although you can't really do much more than fire back. The immense effort in making all of the rules feel respective of a close quarters battle, even the artillery rationale aside, which, breaking a radio kind of thing, but let's just set that aside for a second. It all makes sense. And because it makes sense, it definitely starts to make it easier to adopt, adapt, and just absorb the rules, vast as they are. Once you've got the basic rules down, after a game or two, 80% of the rules are second nature, and they blur into what is as close to a chaotic cinematic experience, close quarters battle movie as you're going to play right now. The other thing is the cards and the units. You have cards, you have units. They blend together in this harmony of unison or not. There's kind of a three-person salsa dance of orders and actions and risk. The fact that the cards, you have orders, but you can augment them with actions. Oh, there are events, they come up. And then you have everything on a card, reducing the amount of components you need. Fields of Fire is another game that does that, except Fields of Fire puts 97 things on a card, and until you grok it, there's just a ton of stuff on that card to kind of to Tetris-like information thing. This is not the same. This is much simplified to that. It's really just four sections of a card and stuff, but it's so wonderful. I felt like I felt like over time as I played this game that I would level up on proficiency of understanding, even though I feel like I'm woefully undernourished in the strategic mastery department. I felt like you can, as time goes on, as you play this game, you can set aside more and more of the rules focus and just get caught up in the fray, because the rules become second nature, and you feel it kind of flowing in from, I need to, you're not hiding behind this numeric forest trying to blend through to figure out what your options are. You're like, I can see at a glance, because I have the numeric understanding in my mind what's going to happen, and now I can start getting down to the bird's eye cinematic fun with it. You can feel pinned down seriously in this game. You will also experience stalemates. You'll call in artillery and breathe relief that it didn't stray too far. You'll take risks to try to move units along a tree line, hoping that opportunity fire won't wither your forces into an ineffective stupor. You will take your enemy to the brink and they somehow will find a way back, and vice versa. These are things I love about it. So, in conclusion, I grew up loving World War II movies. Midway, Guns of Navarone, The Great Escape, Hogan's Heroes, Tora, 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 The Longest Day. When I go into most war games, I go in thinking cold clinical strategy on how to defeat. I'm looking at chits. I'm looking at possibilities, opportunities, risks. I'm looking down with this sort of like detached view of what needs to happen to accomplish whatever the objective is for that given scenario. But that's not true of all games. Memoir 44 was the first game in a very simple rendition of what I felt like was a World War II movie I'm inside of, replete with nail-biting moments, die rolls, just enough complexity to make it a good gateway into possible wargaming. Combat Commander Europe and the whole entire series is basically Memoir 44 plus plus. I mean, when I play this game, I get swept up into the flow of battle. Games 1 through 5 that I ever played were all about numbers and additives and subtractives, thank God not multiplicatives. And I could almost peek out from the numeric landscape to kind of catch a glimpse of the John Wayne, Gary Cooper, Gregory Peck kind of fun, of that movie, that romantic movie time. But once past that, as the games went on, every game of Combat Commander Europe since is basically a movie being played out wherein the ending can change on a dime. Every turn is kind of its own story arc, and where you win or whether you lose, I felt like I was part of some masterful director's cut of a battle in the era of World War II. And again, it's not for everyone, but if you enjoyed Memoir 44 and you feel up to the challenge of more challenge, Combat Commander Europe will prove itself time and time again as the consummate World War II storytelling machine that it is, and you will want popcorn and overpriced M&Ms for every moment of it. So with that, I highly, highly approve. Now, if you are interested in this game, as a side note, and I highly recommend, and I'm going to put links at the end of this video on BGG and on YouTube, where there are two very, very good videos that I think are essential for anyone learning this game that isn't already acclimated to just diving into a rulebook and osmotizing it. One is a flat-out mic drop of an explanation called Harsh Rules, which goes over this game in very good detail, very well done video. The other one is a 3-hour playthrough from some very expert Combat Commander Europe players that will give you everything you need to know way better than I did about the game. So once again, Combat Commander Europe, Hall of Fame material, best of the best. 14 years later, it's still shivers my timbers. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time on Harebrained Games.